Welcome to High Point University's premier life skills seminar featuring HPU's in-residence leaders and other global change agents.
I would like to talk to you in this session about building a team, being part of a team. I wrote a book several years ago on the 17 laws of teamwork, and it really became a kind of the accepted standard teaching in how to develop teams. And so let's get going, and let's see if I can hopefully add value to you. And then we'll do a little bit of Q&A. I'd like to do that toward the end. Let me give you the transition of what's happened in leadership since you're in the business school. If you went into a bookstore in the 1980s, way before you were born, there would not be a leadership book in the store. There'd be management books. Peter Drucker was kind of the management guru, and you would go into a bookstore and they would have books on how to manage a business, but they wouldn't have any books on how to lead. Leadership really didn't become a real prominent subject until the late 1980s. And what happened is life began to speed up. And you can't manage speed. You have to lead speed. And so when things began to happen at a quicker pace, all of a sudden businesses were saying we not only have to have good management, we also have to have some people that can get in front of the issue and do some leadership. So that's when leadership kind of began. And I was privileged to write books right at the beginning of the leadership era. I wrote a book called Developing the Leader Within You, which was the first book written on how to develop yourself as a leader. Then I wrote a book on developing the leaders around you, which was a book on how to develop people on your team to lead. And it was the first book that really recognized that you could learn leadership skills. Up until that time, people felt that like leaders were kind of born. And in fact, when I do Q&A, sometimes they still ask me the question, John, are leaders born? And when they ever ask me, are leaders born? I always give them the same answer. Of course they are. I've never met an unborn leader, okay? And don't particularly care to either. But they're really asking, is it true that when people are born, some of them get to the front of the leadership line because they have natural leadership skills, and some people go to the back of the line? But developing yourself as a leader and developing other leaders just became a passion in the business world. And up until probably 2000, 2003, that was just frontline leadership. In fact, management books, they were still in bookstores, but they were less and less. Leadership began to take their place. And then we entered into a third phase, which was leaders need teams. They need people to come around them to support them and help them lead well. So we went into kind of a leadership teamwork kind of thing, and that's when I wrote the 17 laws of teamwork. We're now into a fourth stage of business and leadership, and now we're into how to develop leadership teams. Because what we've discovered is that if you can lead well, it's wonderful, but if you can have a team of leaders, not a team just that supports you as a leader, but a team of leaders, then you can really do well. Then you can really excel. So I want to talk to you about teamwork and how do you develop yourself and improve yourself. In fact, if I could ask you a question and we were having just a one-on-one conversation, the question I would ask you is what are you doing to develop yourself? And secondly, what are you doing to develop others? Because the ability to develop yourself will help add to your success, but the ability to develop others will compound your success. And the ability to do that is going to be absolutely huge. So let me talk to you for a little bit about great qualities of great teams. How do you develop a great team? How do you become part of a great team? How do you also not only become part of a great team, but as a leader, how do you develop a team of leaders? So I'm ready to go. Let me ask you a question. Are you ready to go? Okay, let's see what we look at your neighbor and say to them, just look at them and say, you're about to learn something. Go ahead and tell them that. In fact, look back at them and say, why do you think I brought you here, okay? Why do you think you? Okay. let me talk about the first part of teamwork, which is leading teams, which is, what are the qualities of great coaches? When you look at a coach of a team, what do they do that really makes them successful? There are 5 I'll share with you today. There are more, but I'll just share 5 of them with you. One of them is that great coaches, great leaders, they focus every day on improving their team. In fact, that is their main focus. Every day they're asking the question, how can I make and help the team get better, grow more, and be more successful? I had a privilege of being mentored by one of the great coaches in America. His name is John Wooden, and he was, by Sports Illustrated, voted the greatest coach of the last century. And he was a coach at UCLA, basketball coach. They won 10 national championships. And I had the privilege of his last 14 years. He literally died at 99, but his last 14 years, I had the privilege of spending some time with him and having him mentor me. And we were in a mentoring session one day, and he said, there's a question I ask myself every day as a coach. And I said, well, Coach, what is that? And then he gave me that, how can I make my team better? And I think that when you're coaching and leading a team, the first transition that you make is that it's all about the people on your team. It's not about me. If I'm the leader, it's all about them. And to develop and improve people, you need to develop a common language. They need to begin to understand where they are, because what happens is that in leadership often we assume too much. And we lack intentionality in how to develop, how to improve people, how to really grow a team. So many people, they think that if I could have a great dream, I think I could succeed. And teamwork is what makes the dream work. But what happens is that if you don't improve the team and they don't get better, your success is going to always be based upon the competence of your team. So let's say, for example, you have a big dream. Let's say you have a 10. It's top. It's just a huge dream. So you have a 10 dream, but let's say you only have a 5 team. They're just average. Well, you will not receive what you dream about. You'll receive what your team can produce. And so you may have a big dream, but the inability to grow and improve your team keeps you average. And so many times people think that it's the dream that makes the team, but in reality, it's the team that makes the dream. And every time that you improve or grow your people, your reality of that dream even comes closer. I wrote a book a few years ago called Put Your Dream to the Test. And it talks about in that book about the fact that your ability and my ability to develop good people and to grow them and to improve their life is going to really determine how successful we really begin to be. I wrote another book that's big in the corporate world called The 5 Levels of Leadership. And the 5 levels of leadership is a definitive journey of progress from going to the lower level to the higher level. Because leadership is not a noun, it's a verb, and it's active. And so when you start at the bottom, you get a position. That's where we all start. We get a position on the team. And so many times people think that positional leadership is leadership, but it's really not. The position doesn't make the leader makes the position. And when I travel a lot internationally, in fact, I'll be international before the week's over, when I'm dealing and teaching leadership, what I try to help people understand is that the position of a leader that you get on the team, that whatever position you get in the beginning, it doesn't make you a leader. It just gives you the opportunity to lead. And so what you want to do is developing teams is you want to give them an opportunity to lead, because growth is a 4-step process. This is out of Stanford, but if people just learn leadership, if they just listen, if like I'm teaching right now, a little bit of leadership, a little bit of teamwork, your chance of improvement is only about 5% as you listen to me. That's about the tipping point. But if you not only listen and learn, but in that same process, you get to visually see it. It takes your improvement from 5% to about 20 to 25%. In other words, leadership is highly visual. Teamwork is highly visual. People do what people see. And so when you can see leadership in front of you, all of a sudden it becomes something that you can learn and accept and embrace. It's just, again, 89% of what you and I know, we know visually. We 10% audio and 1% through the other senses. So it's very important to not only learn, listen, and then observe or watch, have a demonstration, the visual example. But then when you get to practice leadership, that's when teamwork and leadership, that's when you really improve yourself. That's when you really improve your people. Practice is where the improvement comes. And developing leaders, once they begin to try it and practice it, that's when you really have your greatest improvement. You go from maybe 20, 25% clear up to about 70%. I mean, it's a huge jump in improving. I have 7 companies. One of our companies, we do transformation in nations, and so we go with the invitation of the president of countries, and we do transformation in values training in the classroom. And what we do is we do it in small groups, little tables like this, where 6 or 8 students sit around the table and they weekly in their curriculum learn good values. But the key that really makes it work is that every week another student facilitates the table. In other words, they have to practice leading. And what happens is in practicing and facilitating leading, that's where they really learn how to lead. And so it's kind of like a values transformation program, but in the same sense, it's also a training leadership. So to improve your people, they have to learn, and then they have to see the example, but to really grow, they have to practice. What's interesting is that the last thing that happens to improve people is just ridiculous and off the chart. It's kind of a surprise. There's one more dimension that takes you to another level, another stage, and that is sharing. That once you practice and you get back into that small group and you begin to share what you're learning, it becomes an incredible, not a learning experience for you, but for the team. And so when you're working on improving your team, when you're really working on helping them to get better, you want to make sure you have those 4 different ingredients, and especially if you can do it in a small group, to really make your team better. So good coaches understand that process, and so they have the learning dimension, the visual, the demonstration, example stuff, the practice, and then, of course, and then the sharing. The second thing that coaches do really well, and I just referred to it, so I won't need to stay here long, is that they lead by example. Very simple. People do what people see. Not what they hear, but what they see. And leadership, teamwork is highly, highly visual. So when you're wanting to be the visual example of your team to develop better teams, you ask yourself, what's required of me to really do well in this area? A few years ago, I did the opening session at the United Nations, and they asked me to spend 2 hours with the ambassadors of the world on the subject of leadership. Now, that was a real challenge because these ambassadors come from different types of governments. There are some that come out of kingdoms, there are some that come out of dictatorships, some come out of socialism, some come out of capitalism. So you have all kinds of leadership government structures of which their perspective of leadership is based upon what type of government they're in. So I knew it was going to be a very challenging exercise for me to spend 2 hours to all the ambassadors trying to help them really gain a perspective of leadership. And so I did a teaching that day called 3 Questions That Every Follower Asks of Their Leader. Now, we're talking today about teamwork. So what are those questions? I mean, if you're going to develop a good team, what are the questions that they're asking when they're looking at you to lead them or to coach them? The 3 questions are, number 1, do you care for me? Number 2, can you help me? And thirdly, can I trust you? Those are the 3 questions. Now, when we ask, do you care for me? That's all about, having kindness and compassion toward people. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. Can you help me is all about competence. I mean, are you good? I mean, the only reason people follow leaders is they believe that if they follow leaders, their life will be better. And thirdly, can I trust you, which is about character. So when you think of yourself as leading a team, and when you think of yourself as coaching your team and improving them and getting the best out of them, look at yourself as an example and ask yourself those questions. Do I really care for people? One of the things I teach in leadership is that when you stop loving your people, stop leading your people. Now, why is that? Because when you don't care for people, you'll do what I would call the greatest error in leadership, and that is you'll manipulate people. And manipulating people is always wrong. When you manipulate people, you move them for personal advantage. In other words, you win, but they don't win. That's in leadership, that's always wrong. But if you don't care for people, that's exactly what you'll do. In fact, when I travel internationally again, and I have times with the presidents of the countries private when all the handlers are gone, the conversation we always have is are the people better because you're leading them? Or how much do you care for the people? So I ask myself, if I'm going to be the right kind of example for my team, do I care for my people? The second question, can you help me? Now I look and say, am I improving? Is my team better because I'm the leader of the team? Are we improving? Are we making progress? And then thirdly, am I trustworthy? Am I a trustworthy person? And I think when you ask yourself those three questions, it really helps us to be the kind of example that we want to be for the team. The third thing that great coaches do well is that they recruit well. They have the ability to bring good people on their team. I was doing a major national conference a couple years ago for Chick-fil-A, and we were doing a Q&A, and they were asking me the question, how do we develop good leaders? And I shared with them that the best guarantee to develop a good leader is to know what a good leader looks like. Because if you know what they look like, your odds of really improving them just become much greater than if you don't have a picture of what they look like. It's one of the reasons I wrote a book on the 17 qualities of a team player. What kind of qualities are you looking for in a team player? I wrote one on the qualities of leadership. What are you looking at? Because the picture that you see is what you recruit. And we recruit well when we know what we're looking for. We don't recruit well when we don't know what we're looking for. I was having lunch a couple years ago with Lou Holtz, who's one of my favorite sports people in the world. He's just hysterical. Great coach, too. Very, very successful. And we were having lunch, and he said, John, I've coached good players, and I've coached bad players, and I'm just a better coach with good players. Well, that's true for him. That's true for all of us. We're all better when we have better players. So the ability for us to attract good people to our team is very essential to our success. In my book, The 21 Laws of Leadership, one of the laws is the law of magnetism. And the law of magnetism just simply says, we attract not who we want, we attract who we are. Like begets like. And so the moment I understand that, when I began to build my team, it goes back to the question I asked at the beginning of the teaching, what am I doing to develop myself? Because the more I improve myself, the more I increase my odds of getting better people on my team. If I had both hands so I could use them, but if I had both hands free, I would illustrate this visually. But let's just say you're an average leader from a 1 to a 10, you're a 5. I'm a 5, okay? So what happens if I'm a 5? Well, what I attract will be 4s, 3s, 2s, and 1s. What I don't attract are 8s, 9s, 10s. There's in the history of the world, a person with 9 competency has never awakened in the morning and said, I'd like to follow a 5. It doesn't happen. So when we improve ourselves and develop ourselves, we improve our odds of getting better people. And when we improve our odds of getting better people, we are going to be, of course, much more successful. There's a teaching I have, I'll take maybe a minute or two to share it with you, It's like an hour teaching lecture, but it's about that you should work on in your area of giftedness and in your area of skills. You should work on your strengths, not your weaknesses. And yet we live in a culture that basically says, work on your weaknesses. And so, if you got an A in math and you got a C in language or whatever, they say, well, work on your language. And I basically look at it and say, don't work on your language. Just thank God you got a C, okay? And move on. Work on your strengths, because it's in your strengths where you'll not only have your greatest improvement, it's in your strengths where you'll be able to go higher in your success. Because you can only improve yourself in natural abilities and skills about two numbers. So if I'm working on my weaknesses, I'm already below a 5, I'm a 3. That may mean I could get up to a 5, which means I'm going to be average. And, people don't pay for average. People don't follow average. Average, it doesn't appeal to anybody. And so, but if I start with something I'm already like above average, maybe a 6, I can climb to an 8. So in areas of giftedness, ability, you want to work in your strengths. Now, in areas of choice, you want to work on your weaknesses, because you can greatly improve weaknesses. You can go from a 1 to a 10 in weaknesses. You can't in strengths, but in one, you can have rapid growth in weaknesses. I mean, for example, an attitude is a choice, and so a person has a bad attitude. One day realize this isn't helping me at all, so I'm going to get better, and so I'm going to change. I'm going to have a good attitude, and in a few months you can go from a 1 to a 10. There's great improvement. So you work on your weaknesses if it's a choice, but you work on your strengths if it's something that is more or less an innate ability or gift that you have. But here's what I know. The more that you improve yourself, the more you improve the potential of really developing good people. The fourth thing that coaches do to develop great teams is that they create a growth environment for their team. They create an environment that is very conducive and positive, that helps people really grow and improve their life. And I think I'm going to take a moment and share with you what that looks like, because I think this is so essential in developing yourself. So as I give this to you, you could think of developing yourself as a team player or as a leader, but you can also think of developing other people. When I was in my 20s and really became very passionate about leadership and decided to build my career around training and developing leaders, when I became very passionate about leadership, I realized that the environment, the culture that I was going to be in was going to determine how well I succeeded. So I sat down and I began to ask myself, what does a good culture look like for me? What's a good environment look like for me to really develop and grow myself as a leader? And I'm going to share with you now just a few things, not all of them, but just a few things that really helps you to develop a culture for growth for yourself and, again, growth for your team. A growth environment is a place, number one, where other people are ahead of you. In other words, you're not the best in the class. Somebody's smarter, somebody's brighter, somebody's more successful. In fact, what I teach is that when you're at the head of the class, you're in the wrong class, and you need to get out of that class. You always need to be around people that have done more, seen more, been more, because all growth and stretching comes from being around better people. When I'm finished here today, I'll jump on a plane and I'll go to Nashville, and for the next 2 days I'll write songs with writers that are number one hit writers for songs that all of us know, and I'm writing songs off of books I've written, and I'm having a blast. But when I go in the studio tomorrow, I'm the least in the class. I mean, everybody's better, faster, smarter than me. They all have number one hits, and so it's so fun to be in an environment where everybody's better than me. And I'm learning, and I'm watching them, and I'm asking questions, and so to have a growth environment is you just want to be in a place where other people are bigger, better, and faster than you. The second thing that gives you a tremendous growth environment is you want to be in a position or place where you're continually challenged, where when you awaken in the morning, you realize that there's a hill to climb, that it's not going to be easy, it's not going to be quick, it's going to be tough. You know, everything worthwhile is uphill, and we do our best when we have a challenge in front of us. We do our best when it's not easy and when we have to work hard. And so you want to keep yourself in an environment where you're constantly having challenges in your life. A growth environment is a place where the atmosphere or the environment is encouraging, where you have people around you that are there to support you and encourage you. I think one of the incredible things about HPU is that they have created this kind of an environment at this university where it's an environment that's very conducive for encouragement. You know, encouragement's kind of like the oxygen of the soul. And it's very encouraging to, you know, you've got people that are helping you, supporting you. They want you to succeed. I think a growth environment is a place where failure is not your enemy, where you really learn to kind of embrace failure, because almost all great learning comes out of our losses, not out of our gains. Bill Gates, just the other day, was talking and said, you know, success is a lousy teacher. It makes people think they can't lose. How true that is. But when you're in an environment where you understand failure and embrace it and say, you know, I'm learning something from this. I'm going to get better. I'm going to get better. I'm going to get better because of that. And a growth environment is a place where accountability is practiced, where we're accountable for what we're doing and how well we're doing it. There's hardly any improvement in our life if there's not some kind of an accountability. Now, let me give you the last quality of a coach, and then I'll talk to you about maybe 5 qualities of a good team player, and then hopefully, if you have some questions, I'll be glad to answer a few of them. The last quality of a great coach, I think, is they understand what I call the Pareto principle. And I learned this when I was working on a business degree in college. One day a professor stood up in class and taught a lesson that while I was taking notes in that classroom, I realized that what he was teaching me that day had incredible possible advantages in my life if I could learn the Pareto principle. It's about priorities. And it was in an econ class, but the prof was talking about the fact that our priorities determine our production. And he said if you took the top 10 things of things that you need to accomplish in your life, or right now, maybe at school, and you prioritize them, and number 1 was truly the most important thing you could work on, number 2 was truly the second, and in descending order, clear down to number 10 was the least important. And then he said, this Italian economist, Pareto, he said what he teaches basically is if you just do the top 2 things, number 1 and 2, you don't have to do all 10. If you just do the top 2 things, you'll get an 80% return of everything that you need. In other words, 2 things gives you 80% what you need. He said if you flip it, though, and you don't prioritize, and you do the bottom 8 and ignore the top 2, the bottom 8 will only give you a 20% return. That's why you hear sometimes it called the 20-80 principle or the 80-20 principle. That day while I was taking notes, in fact, I went to him after the class, and I asked him where I could, learn more, and he kind of became a mentor of mine for the next couple of months in this principle, because I realized if I could really learn this in life, activity is not necessarily accomplishment at all. I'm in developing countries all the time, and they work very hard. They don't have a return for their work. And it's many times, almost always, it's a priority issue. And so I began to understand that, it's not how hard you work, it's how smart you work. It's this whole issue of how do you prioritize your time. But then I began to get really excited as I grew, and over the years, and I've studied Pareto all my life now. I teach it. But what really changed me as a leader and as a team player was when I realized that if you would substitute priorities for people, if you have 10 people on your team, what you'll find out about that team is that 2 out of the 10 will give you about 80% of what you need from the team. It's just the way it works. That you have 10 players, but they're not all equal, and they don't give an equal return. And 2 will give you an 80% return, and the other 8 will give you the 20% return. Now, what happens in developing teams is that we spend a lot of time with the bottom 20% because we say, well, if I could improve them, their life's not really turning out really well. If I could really improve them, this would be great. But what we don't understand is that's not where the return is. The return, you should give 80% of your time to the top 20% of your people. And then the top 20% of the people take care of the other 80%. Once I began to understand in leadership and in teamwork how that worked, it just became revolutionary as far as being able to successfully lead people and develop teams and develop strengths. So the Pareto principles, you may want to look into it and dive in it. It's if you start diving, you'll dive deep for sure, but it'll give you some terrific returns. Now let me switch now to the team player. You and I, if we're on the team, what are the practices? What are the qualities of great players? And the qualities, let me give you 5. Number 1 is that great players, they are always improving themselves, and they're not only always improving themselves, they're always improving their other teammates. They realize that to do more, you have to become more. And so they're constantly looking at their life, and they're looking at their growth, and they're looking at their improvement, and they're asking themselves, how do I really get better? A few years ago, I wrote a book called No Limits, and No Limits is about how to reach your potential. And you and I reach our potential by understanding and intentionally doing 3 things. We improve when we are aware of what we do well, and we're aware of what we don't do well. You have to know yourself to grow yourself. So to really grow, I have to find me. I have to find who I am. So it starts with awareness, and then it continues with giftedness, and then it closes with making the right choices. I think way too many times we spend too much time on. I know even with my own children, I would brag about what they were good at. And one day I realized as a parent that, they're good at something because they're gifted at it. My son is highly gifted in technology. He's one of the 5 top technology people in America. I mean, he just life-changing what he could do in the technology field and the awards that he's won. And I just talk about how amazing, Joe, you are in technology. And all of a sudden, as a parent, I realized that what I really ought to be bragging on is not their giftedness or their spatial abilities. What I really ought to be bragging on is their choices. And I would just say to you today that be proud of your choices. The gifts that you have, honestly, were given to you. You want to improve them, but I have a leadership gift, and I've been leading all my life, and I've been very successful in leading all my life. I have 7 companies and have the largest leadership training organization in the world, have the largest coaching company in the world. I got leadership down. But that was a gift to me. I was already good at it, but I've worked to improve it, obviously. But where I really need to take my pride isn't in what I've already been given. Where I need to take my pride is the choices I make. Again, back to my mentor, John Wooden, he would say, there's a choice you have to make in everything you do. So keep in mind that in the end, the choice you make makes you. It's very true. And so to improve yourself, you really improve yourself by making the right choices. I spend some time, not a lot of time, in the sports world. I have an opportunity to spend a lot of time in it, but I don't have the time to do that. But I'm always interacting with coaches, and I've been privileged to be in every great sporting event probably in the world and be a part of it. And in the interaction with the coaches, they all tell me the same thing. They say their greatest challenge in developing good team players is that when they get a great player, it's hard to get them to value their teammates, or at least maybe not. They value their teammates, but they want special consideration. So John Wooden was telling me when he was coach at UCLA, he had this player named Sidney Wicks, who literally the day he came on the basketball court, although he was the youngest player on the team, everybody knew by the end of practice he's the best player. But he didn't value his teammates, and he didn't. He was sometimes I'm not sure that they were even necessary. And so Coach Wooden said the only way I could discipline him or kind of help move him in the right direction is to bench him. So he said, here, I've got the best player on the team sitting on the bench. And said it was driving Sidney crazy because, he wanted to be out on the court. And in fact, he said during games, sometimes during timeouts, he'd come over and say, Coach, send me the game. I can help the team. Send me the game. And so one day he was having a conversation with him, and so Sidney Wicks looked at him and said, Coach, you know I'm the best player on the team. And Coach Wood said, well, yeah, I know that. You are the best player on the team. But he said the team doesn't play best when you're on it. And he was trying to help him have a maturity is being able to see things from the perspective of others. The immaturity is not being able to see things from the perspective of others. But your ability to be aware and improve yourself not only helps you, but it obviously helps the team. The second thing that great teammates do really well is that they communicate well with each other. They really spend a lot of time communicating. They understand that they need to be able to connect with each other. I just wrote a book that came out of just within the last year called The 16 Laws of Communication. And one of the laws is the law of connecting, which says that communicators know that it's all about others. It's always about others. And to communicate well, we always look at others and say, where are you? How can I find you? One of the great coaches in college women's basketball was a lady by the name of Pat Summitt, who coached at the University of Tennessee for many, many years. She was kind of the John Wooden who was in for men's basketball for women's basketball. And so I had a privilege of having a good friendship with her, and sometimes she used my books with her team a lot. And so I every once in a while I'd go up to Knoxville to watch a game. First time I went up to watch a game, when halftime came, she looked at me, she said, come on in the locker room. So I went in the locker room with the coaches and the lady volunteers. And what I saw was very interesting because immediately when they went into the locker room, the players went to about 12 seats with a big marker board. And the coaches didn't even stay with the players. They went into a separate room. So I just sat in the back and with the team. And on the marker board, there were three headings: what we did right, what we did wrong, what we must change. And one of the players jumped to the marker board with the marker and started talking to her teammates. Now we're talking about this constant communication. And, what did we do right the first half? What did we do wrong the first half? What do we need to change? And they did this. I could tell they were used to doing this exercise. It took them about, 4 or 5 minutes. In walks Pat Summitt. She walks up, looks at the board, studies it for a moment, and then she talks to them for maybe a couple minutes and sends them back out. Later that night, we're having dinner. I said, Pat, you got to talk to me about the marker board experience. I said, I can tell your team is used to doing that all the time. She said, oh, yes. She said, every halftime, we got the marker board ready, and one of the team players asked her teammates, what do we do right? What do we do wrong? What do we need to change? So I said, how did that happen? What happened? She said, when I started coaching, I wasn't successful. For the first 2 years, my team, they won about the same amount of games that they lost. And she said, I knew there was something I was missing as a coach, as a leader. And so she said, during the off season, I really just looked into myself and said, what am I not doing well as a coach? She said, I came to the conclusion that I was leading by assumption. Now, assumption is the mother of all leadership mess-ups. In other words, she was looking at her team, and she thought she knew where they were, but they weren't there. She was assuming they could do things that they couldn't do. She was assuming they knew things that they didn't know. And so she said, I had to find a way as a coach to find out what my players knew so that I could take them and I could lead them where they are, not where I am. There's too big of a gap. And so she did the marker board exercise. Now, I tell you that because as you lead your team, as you build teams, as you go in your business world and you know, you're going, the only way you can compound influence, the only way you can compound money, all compounding comes in the ability to be able to lead teams and to be a good team player. It's all happens in teamwork. Compounding is always in teamwork. And as you think of that, you just want to keep saying to yourself, I don't want to lead them by assumption. So I've got to find a way to ask questions that will help me find them. When I was a young leader, this was a real weakness I had. I was kind of I was very visionary, and I knew where I wanted to go, and let's go to that mountain. And, you know, here, get on the team. And I was recruiting people to get on the team. But I was very directional. And then one day I realized that I was assuming too much, and I was missing them. So I started asking questions. In fact, I wrote a book called Good Leaders Ask Great Questions. And I just started asking them questions about where are you, and I found, and when I could find them, then all of a sudden I realized that, you know, that I could lead them. But the ability to share communication. Another weakness I had when I was a young leader is that I would think of an idea, and instead of sharing the idea with my team, I would hold the idea and try to work on it till it was really a good idea. And then I thought, now I'll tell them a really good idea, and they'll be very impressed that I lead really well, and they'll get excited, probably give me a standing ovation, and away we go. And what I discovered was that I was missing out on an incredible component of success in business. And here's what it is. The moment I quit trying to hold the idea and I began sharing the idea with my team, here's what I'm thinking. What do you think? How can we make this better? The moment I went to learning how to collaborate with people, today, again, when I walk into a room and I'll put down an idea, I'll look at my team and everybody knows in the next hour we're going to make that idea a better idea. Because how do you have a great idea? You have a great idea because it's birthed out of 4 or 5 good ideas. It takes a few good ideas to get to a great idea. You don't go from a vacuum to a great idea. And so that collaboration, and in fact, I say some of my best thinking has been done by others. And developing teamwork and developing and improving your team, the quicker I share with them where I am and what I'm learning, and then say, okay, make me better. And every time, 100% of the time, they make me better. They've done some interesting surveys about shared thinking and sustained thinking. Again, I wrote a book a few years ago on thinking, which was entitled "How Successful People Think." And in shared thinking and sustained thinking, here's what they found. This is very interesting. If you take 10 people and you put them in a room and say, here's an idea, here's a thought. You have an hour to work on it, make it a better thought. Come back in an hour. Every time, the thought has improved. Why? It's improved because instead of one person thinking about it and having one perspective, they get the perspective of everybody, and all of a sudden it becomes so much more mature, and they improve the idea. So that's shared thinking. Shared thinking always improves. Whatever you put out on the table, they make it better. Then they take 5 of the people. It doesn't matter who 5. They don't have to qualify them all. They just take half of them and say, okay, you can leave. And they look at the 5 that are remaining, and they look at them and say, okay, now spend another hour on this idea. 1 more hour. And see what you can come up, see if you can improve it. 100% of the time. This is very interesting. Every time, with sustained thinking, the idea is improved. So when you put shared thinking and sustained thinking side by side, you really began to do some masterful improvement in your life. The third thing I think that great teammates do really well is they just really are all in. They're committed. They're committed to what the cause is, what the purpose is. Again, going back to my mentor, John Wood, such a brilliant teacher. I would encourage you, if you've probably not heard of him, but I would encourage you. He's written probably 7 or 8 books. I would just encourage you to read his stuff. He's just recognized as one of the greatest teachers. He was very wise. So he'd watch his team during practice, and one day, in fact, I had an interesting discussion after he'd retired. I said, "What do you miss most about coaching?" He said, "I miss the practice." He said, "Not the games." He said, "If you practice well, you play well." So I miss the practice. But he said he'd watch his players, and sometimes the players weren't given 100%. Which is natural. Maybe they're tired. Maybe they had an exam last night. I don't know. Maybe their girlfriend broke up with them. Who knows? But they're not given 100%. He said, I would walk over to them and I'd say, "You're a little tired today. Yeah, you're not quite in it. Yeah, okay. Not given probably 100% today. No, coach. No." And he'd say, what percent you think you're given today? 70. I'm doing about 70. Okay. I said, good. So I said, "Now I just want to say something about today and what you're doing. If you're giving me 70% today, I know what you're thinking. Tomorrow, I'll make up for it." He said, "You can't." He said, "You have to understand that you never can regain what you don't do." He said, "I know you're thinking tomorrow I'll give 130% to make up the 30% of the day." But he said, "You can't give." He said, "You can only do 100%. 100% is maximum." So if you love sports where they talk about they gave 110%, well, it's a nice statement, but it's not true. You can't give 100. You can only give 100%. And then he would say, "So what you understand is what you didn't give today on the floor, it's lost. You don't regain it. You don't pick it back up." In fact, it was out of that teaching he gave me that I wrote a book called Today Matters, which basically says every day we're either preparing or we're repairing. We're either preparing and setting ourselves up for success tomorrow, or we're fixing what we didn't do right yesterday. It's in one of those two areas. But to really get the best out of yourself and get the best out of your team, to separate the players from the pretenders, wow, there's a commitment there. In the 17 laws of teamwork, one of the laws I write about is the law of accountability. The law of accountability says teammates must be able to count on one another. When I wrote the law, my publisher came back and said, "John, there's no such word as accountability, so you got to get another word." And I said, "Well, I like the word." I said, "Well, it's not a word." I said, "Well, let's use it." I said, "Think about it. How does a word become a word?" A word becomes a word because somebody said it. Somebody said, "Okay, let's make it a word." And so we did accountability, and now it's become a word. But the ability, probably the highest compliment you can get from somebody that's a teammate, is they can look at you and they say, "I can count on you." That's huge when they say that. Now, number 4, I think great players, I think they are, they understand diversity, and they understand how it complements the other team players. You don't want everybody to be alike. When I wrote the 21 Laws of Leadership, one of the discoveries we had out of that book was that not any person does all 21 laws well. In fact, I wrote the book, and there are 5 laws that I would be probably at best average in. So what do I do with the laws of leadership that I don't really do well because I'm not gifted in that area? Well, that's where the team comes in, because we learn to complement one another, and we learn to complete one another. In fact, a great teamwork exercise is to go through something like that, and everybody say, "Okay, I do this law better than the others." And then, what does a quarterback get paid for? A quarterback gets paid for putting the ball in the hand of the right person at the right time to get the largest gain. He doesn't get paid just to run the ball. In fact, most of the time they prefer them not to run the ball so much. You get paid to put the ball where it needs to be. And that whole issue of what do you do? You're putting that ball in the hand of somebody that's a little faster than their other teammates, or it's a little stronger than someone else. And the ability to understand that and do that really well is just absolutely huge. And when you develop a diverse team, wow, it fills in the knowledge gap that you have. It fills in the perspective gap, because how we view things is how we do things. It fills in the experience gap. Andrea Arntz is a good friend of mine, and she for many years was the CEO of Burberry. And when she took that London company over, it really wasn't very successful. In fact, it was headed toward bankruptcy. And she realized that the style of the clothes had gotten old. And she did something very interesting. She took her board, which would be board members would be in probably their 50s average age, and she made them coaches and and coaches, and she started a new board of 20 and 30-year-olds because she knew that when she would go down in age, she would get newer ideas, fresher ideas, more relevant ideas for kids. And she turned Burberry around. It became a very successful company because she understood that the young people needed the wise mentoring of the older people that had been board members, but the board members, they needed the freshness of ideas from the young people, and how that we, it's like Mother Teresa said one time. She said, "You can do things I cannot do. I can do things you cannot do, but together, we can do great things." As I wrap up my teaching, I think that one of the things that helps in understanding the value of team players is that they'll make you better. One of the laws in the laws of teamwork is the law of Mount Everest. The law of Mount Everest says as the challenge escalates, the need for teamwork elevates. What's that mean? Well, if you're going to climb Mount Everest, you don't do it by yourself. Nobody ever has. Nobody ever will. It's too big. It's too high. It's too complicated. The only way you're going to get to the top of Mount Everest is to have a very good team. I was doing a lecture in Seattle a few years ago with Jim Whitaker, who has been to the top of Mount Everest several times, and we were having lunch that day, and I said, what is your greatest accomplishment as a mountain climber? And he said, my greatest accomplishment as a mountain climber, the thing I'm most proud of, is I've helped more people get to the top of Mount Everest than any other mountain climber alive. And I thought, as soon as he told me, I thought, he thinks like a leader. He isn't saying, well, I've been to the top of Mount Everest more than any other person. He said, I've helped more people get there. And that's the essence of teamwork. That's the essence of leadership. You improve your players, you get better, and then you find out that teamwork really does make the dream work. That's what I hope for you. I hope that as I've kind of taught a little bit about teamwork today, that you've grasped the principles, got some of them, go out and apply one or two of them, and begin to practice this kind of leadership. And I wish you really wish you well. I want you to have a great experience here at High Point University, and want you to have a great life. And just always remember, my name's John, and I'm your friend. Thank you very much.